People say the most dangerous person is someone with nothing left to lose. They are wrong. The most dangerous person is a wife who sacrificed everything, only to realize her marriage was a financial fraud wrapped in vows. When my husband looked into the microphone and called another woman his greatest regret, he thought he was breaking my heart. He never knew that was the exact moment I lit the match to level his entire empire. Hello and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. We want to start by sincerely thanking you for your incredible support. But unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operating here. Because of this, we will not be uploading any new videos in the near future and are moving our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon community, where you will find exclusive, true stories that are even better, longer, and filled with highly detailed situations we cannot publicize on YouTube, all brought to life by a cast of emotional voice actors. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, told from the perspective of our main character, Octavia Lloyd. I have always believed that numbers do not lie. As a senior data analyst at Aegis Freight Solutions here in Austin, Texas, my entire career is built on finding anomalies. I sift through thousands of rows of logistical data, searching for the one misplaced variable that threatens to collapse a supply chain. I am trained to look for patterns, to trust logic over emotion, and to anticipate failures before they happen. Yet, for 5 long years, I failed to apply that same analytical rigor to my own marriage. Julian and I had what everyone called the perfect partnership. He was the visionary, the charismatic founder of Oak and Iron Spirits, a craft liquor brand that was slowly but surely making a name for itself in the highly competitive Texas market. I was the anchor. When he first pitched the idea to me, his eyes were burning with a passion that was entirely intoxicating. He needed capital, far more than traditional banks were willing to lend a first-time entrepreneur with no collateral. So, I provided it. I sold the only valuable asset my late grandmother had left me, a modest but beautiful piece of land just outside the city limits. I liquidated my safety net, betting my entire financial foundation on my husband's dream. I poured every ounce of my energy, my savings, and my faith into him. We spent countless nights eating cheap takeout on the floor of our tiny apartment, mapping out flavor profiles and marketing strategies. I built his financial models. I managed the messy logistical spreadsheets while he went out shaking hands and kissing babies, selling the soul of Oak and Iron Spirits to anyone who would listen. I thought we were building an empire together. I thought I was his equal partner in life and in business. The fracture did not happen with a screaming match or a dramatic confrontation. It happened on a quiet Tuesday night, exactly 2 days before the grand launch party of his new premium whiskey line. It was past 2 in the morning. Julian was fast asleep beside me, his breathing heavy and rhythmic, exhausted from weeks of event planning. The room was pitch black, save for the faint, steady hum of the central air conditioning. I was hovering on the edge of sleep when a sudden, harsh blue light sliced through the darkness. It was Julian's iPad, resting on the bedside table. It had just synced with his iCloud. Usually, I would have ignored it. A late-night email from a vendor, a calendar reminder, nothing out of the ordinary. But the screen remained lit just a second too long, casting a ghostly glow over Julian's sleeping face. Something deep inside me, perhaps that deeply ingrained instinct that had made me so good at my job, urged me to look. I rolled over, carefully avoiding making any sound that might wake him, and glanced at the lock screen. The notification was a direct message from Serena. Serena, the social media queen of Austin's elite influencer circle, and more importantly, Julian's first love from his college days. She had recently resurfaced in our lives, brought on board by Julian as a strategic consultant to boost the brand's online presence before the launch. He had assured me it was strictly professional, just a smart business move. I had smiled and played the supportive wife, suppressing the tiny flicker of unease in my gut. The words glowing on the screen were not about marketing metrics or engagement rates. The message read, The paperwork for the Napa Valley estate is finalized. Tomorrow's launch party will be the starting point for our new life. I stared at the screen. 1 second passed, then two. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing weight of heartbreak, for the urge to shake him awake, scream in his face, and demand an explanation for how he could do this to me. But the tears did not fall. My chest did not heave with sobs. Instead, a terrifying, absolute stillness washed over me. The air in the room felt suddenly freezing, pulling all the warmth from my skin. In that chilling moment of clarity, the last 5 years of my life flashed before my eyes, not as a romance, but as a meticulously executed transaction. Every late night I spent balancing his books, every dollar from my grandmother's inheritance, every sacrifice I made while wearing last season's clothes so he could afford bespoke suits for his meetings. It was all just a stepping stone. I was not his partner. I was his angel investor, his stepping stone, his fool. And now that the company was on the verge of massive success, he was ready to cash me out and build his real dream life with the woman he had always truly wanted. I did not gasp. I did not move abruptly. With a hand as steady as a surgeon, I gently pushed the iPad back to its exact previous position on the nightstand. I lay back down, pulling the duvet over my shoulders, and closed my eyes. I matched my breathing to his, slow and rhythmic. I was no longer a loving, trusting wife. The woman who had sacrificed everything for Julian died in that bed at 2:15 in the morning. In her place, the data analyst awoke. I needed to map the system. I needed to find the hidden variables, trace the deleted files, and uncover every single lie he had buried. I began mentally programming a ruthless, flawless plan to dismantle him. Julian thought he was playing a game of hearts, but he had just triggered a game of survival, and he had no idea who he was playing against. The moment Julian's car pulled out of the driveway the next morning, the house transformed from a quiet home into a tactical war room. I called my manager at Aegis Freight Solutions and told him I was taking a sick day due to a severe migraine. Then, I walked straight into Julian's home office, locked the solid oak door behind me, and fired up my high-performance personal workstation. Julian always prided himself on his digital security protocols. He used complex, rotating passwords and two-factor authentication for the Oak and Iron Spirits financial accounts, firmly believing he had successfully locked me out of the very company I helped build from the ground up. But Julian was a charismatic salesman, not a systems engineer. He conveniently forgot that during the grueling first 2 years of our startup phase, I was the one who designed and set up his entire network architecture. I knew every blind spot and every back door because I was the architect who built them. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced precision. Within 15 minutes, I had quietly bypassed his administrative firewalls and mirrored his entire master ledger onto my encrypted secure server. I began running custom diagnostic scripts, the exact same sophisticated algorithms. I used to hunt for massive supply chain discrepancies at work. I commanded the program to flag any unusual outflows of capital, any hidden vendor payments, and any offshore wire transfers over the past 90 days. The algorithm did not take long to find the rot hidden beneath his success. A massive, glaring anomaly sat right at the top of the quarterly expense report. Exactly $150,000 had been wired out of our primary operating account just 3 days ago. The transaction was cleverly categorized under a remarkably vague label: Marketing Campaign Expansion Costs. I leaned closer to the high-resolution monitor, my eyes narrowing. $150,000 was not a simple social media ad spend or a standard influencer contract. That was a heavy down payment. That was the liquid cash required to secure the Napa Valley estate Serena had texted him about the night before. I needed definitive, undeniable proof before I made my next move. I ran a deep trace on the routing number attached to the receiving bank account. It led to a vendor listed as Horizon Media Group, LLC. A quick, targeted dive into the Texas Secretary of State public corporate database revealed the ugly truth. Horizon Media Group was not a legitimate marketing agency with a staff and a portfolio. It was a phantom shell company, incorporated merely 2 months ago, and sitting right there, under the registered agent and sole manager section, was one single name: Serena. My husband was actively embezzling our company funds to buy a luxury house with his mistress. The sheer audacity of his plan was almost impressive, but I knew Julian better than anyone. He was incredibly greedy, but he was also a coward who liked to cover his legal tracks. If he was moving that kind of heavy capital out of the company, he definitely had a broader, more destructive exit strategy in play. I needed to see his ultimate endgame. I pivoted away from the financial software and targeted his secondary email account. This was the hidden address he thought I did not know about, used primarily for his private golf club memberships and luxury car forums. It took a brute force password cracker less than an hour to shatter his basic security. I bypassed the cluttered inbox and went straight to the drafted and deleted folders. There it was, sitting like a loaded gun, an encrypted legal PDF attachment sent to an external corporate attorney. I downloaded the file, broke the weak encryption, and began reading the dense legal jargon. It was a drafted proposal for a revised company operating agreement. My stomach plummeted, not from a sense of sadness, but from the cold, clinical realization of his absolute betrayal. The document outlined a predatory strategy to authorize a massive issuance of new company shares exclusively to Julian, citing his supposed sweat equity as the sole founder. It was a classic corporate freeze-out. He was meticulously planning to dilute my ownership stake. The moment he officially signed that document, my 50% share of Oak and Iron Spirits would be legally reduced to a fraction of a single percent, rendering my initial financial investment and equity utterly worthless. The draft even included a strict timeline, culminating in his lawyers filing divorce papers exactly 30 days after the dilution took effect. He was going to bleed me dry, kick me to the curb with absolutely nothing, and walk into the sunset with Serena and the multi-million-dollar company I paid for. I did not panic. I did not shed a single tear or throw things across the room. I simply picked up my phone and dialed a number I had memorized from a high-profile corporate divorce case I had read about in the business journals last year. "Sterling and Associates. How may I direct your call?" The receptionist answered promptly. "I need to speak with Mr. Sterling immediately," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "Tell him I have a corporate embezzlement and asset dissipation case involving a highly profitable brand, and I need an aggressive financial freeze executed before 8 o'clock tomorrow night." Sterling was widely known as the most ruthless divorce attorney in Austin, a legal predator who thrived on completely destroying cheating spouses and hiding assets. Within an hour, I was sitting across from him in his mahogany-lined office, handing over the printed ledgers, the shell company registry documents, and the draft dilution contract. Sterling reviewed the documents in absolute silence. When he finally looked up, a shark-like grin spread across his sharp features. "Your husband is an arrogant idiot," Sterling said, adjusting his expensive glasses. "He is trying to play the role of a corporate raider, but he left a paper trail a mile wide. With this evidence, we can file an emergency ex parte injunction to freeze every single business and personal account connected to his name. Based on this unauthorized cash transfer, he will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone close on a Napa Valley estate." "Do it," I instructed firmly. "But I need the financial freeze to hit exactly at the peak of his launch party tomorrow night, not a single minute before." "Consider it done, Mrs. Lloyd," he replied, already reaching for his dictaphone. I left his office feeling a strange, powerful sense of euphoria. The legal trap was securely set. The guillotine was hoisted high into the air. Now, I just needed to prepare my wardrobe for the execution. I spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously preparing my armor. I selected the most stunning, floor-length emerald green gown I owned, a dress that screamed untouchable confidence and old money wealth. But the real masterpiece of my ensemble was not the expensive fabric. Hidden deep inside the intricate sequin detailing at the high neckline, I carefully sewed in a military-grade micro-recording device. I spent 3 solid hours writing a custom network bridge, seamlessly syncing the live audio feed to my smartwatch and my encrypted mobile phone. I then routed the signal to instantly override and connect to any standard audiovisual control board I could access. Tomorrow night, Julian fully intended to celebrate his massive triumph in front of Austin's elite investors. He thought he was entirely untouchable. He was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. You should never, ever hand your financial keys to a woman who analyzes data for a living. The evening air in this Texas hill country was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the unmistakable, metallic tang of new money. The sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate we had rented for the night was bathed in golden, cinematic lighting. Valets scrambled to park a seemingly endless parade of imported sports cars and luxury SUVs. Tonight was supposed to be the pinnacle of everything we had built. It was a dual celebration marking Julian's 35th birthday and the highly anticipated, lavish anniversary launch of his premium whiskey collection. Dozens of Austin's most prominent venture capitalists, angel investors, and high society socialites drifted across the manicured lawns, their crystal champagne flutes catching the light like tiny, jagged diamonds. I stood near the edge of the terrace, wrapped in my emerald gown, breathing in the suffocating atmosphere of pure, unfiltered hypocrisy. Everyone in this crowd smiled with perfectly bleached teeth, offering hollow congratulations while secretly calculating how much they could profit from my husband's rising star. I watched them all with the detached, analytical gaze of a woman who already knew the exact structural integrity of the bridge they were dancing on. It was collapsing, and they had no idea. Then, the crowd naturally parted as if making way for royalty. Serena made her grand entrance. She looked less like a corporate consultant and more like a movie star stepping onto a red carpet. She was poured into a backless, blood-red silk dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. She immediately gravitated toward the wealthiest investors in the room, her laughter ringing out, high and melodic. She seamlessly threaded her arm through the elbows of old billionaires, loudly introducing herself as the newly appointed strategic advisor for the brand. Whenever she found herself near Julian, she would lean in just a fraction too close, her manicured fingers lingering on the lapel of his custom tuxedo jacket, sharing whispered, inside jokes that excluded everyone else in the room. They were putting on a show, silently broadcasting their undeniable intimacy to anyone observant enough to notice. Eventually, the crimson predator set her sights on me. She glided across the terrace, two flutes of vintage champagne in her hands, and stopped right in front of me. Her eyes swept over my emerald dress, flashing with a fleeting mix of jealousy and deep, condescending pity. She handed me a glass with a sugar-sweet smile that did not reach her eyes. "It is a beautiful night, is it not, Octavia?" Serena purred, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "You must be so incredibly relieved. You are so lucky to have such a brilliant, capable husband to lean on after all these years of struggling. Honestly, not everyone is cut out for the brutal battlefield of the business world. Playing the quiet, domestic support system behind the scenes is really the absolute best role for you." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air, thick and heavy. A lesser woman would have thrown the champagne in her face. A less prepared wife would have crumbled, crying in the nearest bathroom. But I was not just a wife anymore. I was the architect of their impending ruin. I offered her a flawless, radiant smile, tilting my head with the perfect amount of docile humility. "You are absolutely right, Serena," I replied, my tone smooth and entirely submissive. "Julian handles all the heavy lifting. I just stay in the background and watch how all the pieces come together. It is amazing what you can see when no one thinks you are paying attention." Serena chuckled, completely missing the razor-sharp edge hidden beneath my words. She patted my arm sympathetically, entirely convinced she had successfully put the clueless, boring wife back in her place, and sashayed away to rejoin my husband. Julian caught my eye from across the patio, and I gave him a small, encouraging nod. He beamed back, visibly relaxing. They both firmly believed I was completely blind to their treachery. As the guests began moving toward the main hall for the formal presentation, I quietly slipped away from the crowd. I walked toward the back of the massive ballroom, positioning myself near the audiovisual control station hidden behind a velvet curtain. while the elite attendees were distracted by waiters carrying silver trays of caviar and endless refills of champagne. I pulled out my encrypted mobile phone. I activated the custom network bridge I had coded the previous afternoon. With 3 rapid taps on my screen, I bypassed the venue's basic security firewall and directly synchronized my device to the central operating system of the massive, wall-to-wall LED screen towering behind the main speaker's podium. A tiny, green checkmark blinked on my phone, confirming the uplink was locked. I slipped the phone back into my small clutch purse, my pulse remaining dangerously steady. The 0 hour had finally arrived. A booming voice echoed over the surround sound system, asking the guests to take their seats. The ambient lights dimmed, plunging the audience into a dramatic shadow, while blinding white spotlights snapped onto the center stage. Julian confidently strode up the steps, soaking in the thunderous applause and the aggressive flashing of a dozen press cameras. 2 sleek leather chairs were positioned in the center of the stage, flanked by expensive microphones. He was about to record a live, heavily promoted podcast interview discussing his inspirational journey from a struggling dreamer to an industry titan. He adjusted his jacket, flashing his million-dollar smile to the roaring crowd, entirely unaware that the stage he was standing on was wired to detonate. The live podcast interview commenced with the predictable, nauseating fanfare typical of corporate ego trips. The host, a highly popular business influencer with a slick, polished voice and a perfectly tailored suit, began by lobbing softball questions about flavor profiles, market penetration, and the grueling initial stages of building a startup from scratch. Julian devoured the attention, playing the role of the humble, self-made genius to absolute perfection. He spoke of sleepless nights, relentless determination, and overcoming impossible odds. The wealthy crowd hung on his every single word, captivated by his charisma. I remained standing near the back of the massive ballroom, my posture completely rigid, watching the man I had married spin a complex web of charming fabrications. He was stealing my labor, my funding, and my sacrifices, packaging them neatly into his own personal mythology. Then, the carefully curated atmosphere shifted. The host leaned forward, lowering his voice to create a moment of forced, dramatic intimacy for the audio recording. "Julian," the host said, the massive speakers carrying his deep voice across the hushed room. "Building a brand of this magnitude requires an insane amount of personal sacrifice and relentless drive. When you were at your absolute lowest point, what was the single biggest motivation that kept you pushing forward? What is the real engine behind this incredible empire you have built?" The grand ballroom fell completely silent. The only sound was the subtle, rapid clicking of press camera shutters. This was the designated moment. This was the exact spot in the narrative where the supportive, long-suffering wife usually received her brief, patronizing shout-out. I saw a few older investors near the back subtly glance in my direction, their hands raised slightly, ready to offer their polite, obligatory applause for my service. But Julian did not look at me. Instead, his gaze drifted deliberately across the front row, bypassing the heavy hitters of Austin's financial world until his eyes locked firmly onto the woman in the blood-red silk dress. He stared directly at Serena. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unsaid, scandalous implications. Julian gripped the leather arms of his chair, took a deep, theatrical breath, and leaned directly into the silver microphone. "My greatest motivation," Julian began, his voice dropping an octave, practically dripping with manufactured vulnerability, "came from a massive mistake I made in my past. You see, years ago, I foolishly let go of the one woman who truly understood my vision. Losing her was the single greatest regret of my entire life. Every late night, every bottle sold, every brick of this massive empire has been dedicated to one single purpose. It was all built to fix that regret, to prove that I could finally be the man she always knew I was." The reaction was instantaneous and deeply sickening. A collective gasp of delight rippled through the audience of wealthy socialites and hardened executives. They absolutely loved it. They eagerly ate up the cheap, melodramatic romance of a tortured billionaire fighting his way to the top just to win back his true love. The room erupted into roaring, enthusiastic applause. Down in the front row, Serena did not even attempt to hide her triumph. She slowly turned her head, looking over her bare shoulder, and sought me out in the dim lighting of the back of the ballroom. When her eyes found mine, she offered a slow, deeply cruel smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory. She thought she had just publicly executed me. She fully expected me to do what any normal, heartbroken wife would do. She expected me to drop my gaze, burst into loud tears, and sprint out of the side doors in absolute humiliation, leaving them to enjoy the lavish spoils of my total destruction. Julian briefly glanced toward the back, clearly anticipating the sight of my dramatic, weeping exit. I did not run. I did not shed a single tear. My heart did not break, because it had already turned to absolute ice the night I read that screen in the dark. Instead, I stepped out from the shadows. The heavy fabric of my emerald gown rustled softly against the polished hardwood floor as I began to walk straight down the central aisle. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, my heels clicking sharply and rhythmically, cutting through the fading applause. The crowd, suddenly sensing a dangerous shift in the atmosphere, began to quiet down rapidly. People parted ways, their faces shifting from giddy excitement to pure, uncomfortable confusion as I approached the brilliantly lit stage. Julian's confident, winning smile faltered instantly. A brief flash of genuine panic crossed his eyes. He quickly tried to mask it, but I saw the slight, terrified tremor in his jaw. He thought I was coming up to make a messy scene, to embarrass myself by throwing a hysterical, jealous tantrum in front of his most vital investors. I gracefully climbed the 3 small steps to the main platform. The podcast host, looking entirely bewildered by this unscripted interruption, stood up uncertainly, holding his spare microphone loosely by his side. I walked right past my husband, not even giving him a passing glance, and stopped directly in front of the host, with a polite, freezing smile. I reached out and gently slid the silver microphone from his relaxed grip. I turned to face the massive audience, my posture impeccably straight, looking out over the sea of shocked, silent faces. Then, I turned my head just slightly to look down at Julian, who was now gripping his chair so hard his knuckles were completely white. I brought the microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified through the massive surround sound speakers, was perfectly calm, terrifyingly cold, and echoed clearly into every single corner of the silent hall. "A truly touching story, Julian," I said, letting the sharp words hang in the air for a fraction of a second. "But I just have one small question about the exact price tag on this beautiful regret." I stood perfectly still in the center of the brightly lit stage, holding the silver microphone loosely in my right hand. The silence in the massive ballroom was absolute. I looked directly into Julian's eyes, watching the arrogant, victorious spark within them abruptly extinguish. "I have a very simple question about our corporate accounting, Julian," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "How exactly does a brand new marketing campaign for a local whiskey launch require a direct, unauthorized wire transfer of $150,000 to a vendor that did not even legally exist 2 months ago?" Julian's manufactured, sun-kissed hands seemed to curdle instantly into a sickly, pale gray. Beads of nervous sweat erupted along his hairline, reflecting the harsh glare of the stage spotlights. He shot out of his leather chair as if he had been physically struck. He took 2 rapid steps toward me, his hands outstretched, frantically trying to pry the microphone from my grip. I took a swift, calculated step back, keeping it entirely out of his reach, realizing he could not silence me physically without causing a massive scene. Julian pivoted toward the audience. He let out a loud, highly unnatural laugh that grated against the heavy silence of the room. "Octavia, sweetheart, you have clearly had far too much champagne tonight," he stammered, his voice laced with a desperate, condescending edge. He looked at the front row of investors, offering them a deeply apologetic, practiced smile. "My beautiful wife is just completely exhausted from all the intense party planning. Octavia, you are confused. You do not understand basic corporate cash flow or complex vendor acquisitions. Let us get you a glass of water and take you home right now." He reached for my arm again, playing the role of the caring, embarrassed husband trying to manage his hysterical spouse. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice or pull away in a dramatic panic. I simply raised my left wrist with my right index finger. I firmly pressed the physical action button on the side of my custom synchronized smartwatch, the massive 30-foot LED display board directly behind Julian's head, which had previously been glowing with the golden oak and iron spirits logo, flickered for a fraction of a second. Then, it went completely black. An instant later, it illuminated the entire ballroom in a harsh, unforgiving, clinical white light. The giant screen now displayed a meticulously organized, high-definition collage of pure financial indiscretion. On the far left side, an enlarged, undeniable bank statement showed the exact outflow of $150,000 from our primary operating account. In the center, the official state registry documents for Horizon Media Group clearly displayed Serena as the sole owner, manager, and registered agent, and on the far right side, blown up to a text size that even the oldest venture capitalists in the very back row could read perfectly, was the direct message from Julian's iPad, the unmistakable text about finalizing the paperwork for the Napa Valley estate and starting their new life together. The silence that fell over the room of over 300 elite guests was so profound it was actually suffocating. You could hear the faint, mechanical hum of the air conditioning units and the sharp intake of breath from a dozen different people. The wealthy investors who had just been enthusiastically applauding his romantic speech were now staring at the giant screen with their jaws tightly clenched, their eyes darting back and forth as they rapidly calculated their own potential liabilities and legal exposure to this fraud. Down in the front row, the blood-red silk dress suddenly looked like a massive, glowing target. Serena leaped from her chair, abandoning her graceful, untouchable influencer persona entirely. She began waving her arms wildly, her voice shrill, frantic, and echoing loudly across the quiet room. "This is a complete and utter fabrication," she shrieked, pointing a violently trembling finger at me. Tears began to stream down her face, a masterful display of immediate victimhood. She is a paranoid lunatic. She hacked into highly secure private systems and doctored those images because she is insanely jealous of our professional relationship. That money was entirely legitimate compensation for 6 months of rigorous strategic consulting and brand repositioning. It is legal business capital. You are a psycho, Octavia. I looked down at her from the stage. She was a cornered animal, frantically trying to weave a safety net out of thin air, banking on her ability to manipulate a crowd with tears. I brought the microphone back to my lips. "Legitimate business capital," I repeated calmly, letting the words roll around the silent room, analyzing them as if they were a fascinating piece of raw data. That is a very interesting choice of words, Serena, because usually, when a highly successful, wealthy strategic consultant earns a massive corporate paycheck, they do not immediately attempt to route it through an offshore holding account to hide it from federal auditors. I tapped my smartwatch one more time. The massive LED screen behind me instantly shifted. The bank statements and text messages vanished, replaced by a heavily redacted but highly official-looking federal financial document. It was a comprehensive, classified credit and tax lion report, and sitting right at the very top of the page, highlighted in a blinding, neon yellow box, was an active, aggressive federal tax lien issued directly by the United States Internal Revenue Service. "You see, Julian," I said, turning my gaze back to my husband, who was now trembling visibly on the stage, his eyes wide with unadulterated horror as he stared at the screen behind me. "Your brilliant strategic advisor, the great, unmatched love of your life, is not quite the wealthy, independent woman she portrays on the internet. According to the Internal Revenue Service, Serena currently owes a staggering $500,000 in back taxes and severe civil fraud penalties. As of last Tuesday, every single one of her legitimate bank accounts has been entirely frozen and seized by the federal government." The ballroom erupted. The hushed, shocked silence shattered into a chaotic, buzzing hive of absolute outrage, loud whispers, and furious investors pulling out their phones to call their own legal teams. I stepped a few inches closer to Julian, lowering my voice just enough so only the microphone caught the cold, hard, surgical edge of my tone. She did not come back into your life because she finally recognized your brilliance. She did not want to rekindle some tragic, lost college romance. She was drowning. Julian. She was facing potential federal prison time for tax evasion, and she desperately needed a gullible, arrogant Mark with a newly inflated bank account to bail her out. You were never her greatest regret. You were just her emergency exit plan. Julian stared at the massive screen, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of comprehension. The reality of the federal tax lien washed over him, completely shattering his delusion. He had risked his entire empire, his marriage, and his reputation for a woman who was actively using him as a human shield against the federal government. He spun around to face Serena, the microphone forgotten in his trembling hand. "You lied to me," he gasped, his voice cracking violently. "You told me you needed that capital for the agency expansion. You told me the Napa estate was a joint investment." Serena backed away from the edge of the stage, the blood-red silk of her dress suddenly looking incredibly cheap under the harsh white lights. She had no witty comeback, no manipulative tears left to shed. The raw, irrefutable data was projected 30 feet high for all of Austin's elite to see. Without a single word, she turned and attempted to blend into the chaotic crowd, only to find the investors actively stepping away from her, pulling out their phones to notify their own legal teams of her toxic presence. Julian whipped his head back toward me, panic completely consuming his features. He dropped the microphone and lunged forward, stopping just inches away from me. "Octavia, please," he begged, his voice dropping into a desperate, frantic whisper. "We have to cancel that wire transfer right now. If that $150,000 clears into her frozen accounts, the government will seize it instantly. That is our entire operating runway for the next quarter. The company will go bankrupt by Friday. Please, you have to help me stop it." I looked at the man I had spent 5 years loving, feeling nothing but a profound clinical detachment. "You do not need to worry about the wire transfer, Julian," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of sympathy. "The money never reached her account. I had my attorney file an emergency injunction exactly 24 hours ago. Every single corporate and personal account tied to your name was completely frozen at 6 o'clock this evening under a marital asset dissipation order. That money is sitting safely in a highly restricted legal escrow, completely out of your reach, and completely out of hers." For a second, relief washed over his face, quickly followed by a twisted, arrogant rage. The cornered animal realized his cash was safe, but his ego was fatally wounded. He straightened his posture, his face twisting into a nasty, aggressive sneer. He leaned in close, completely abandoning his charismatic persona. "You think you are so incredibly smart, do you not?" he snarled, pointing a trembling finger right in my face. "You froze the cash. Congratulations. But you seem to have forgotten one massive detail. Octavia, this company is legally registered under my name. I am the sole managing member of the company. You are just an employee. I am firing you right here, right now. I am kicking you out of this building, and you are going to walk away with absolutely nothing." I offered him a slow, chilling smile. This was the moment I had been meticulously programming for the last 48 hours. "I was waiting for you to say that," I whispered. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a single, perfectly folded legal document. I held it up between us, letting the harsh stage lights catch the official notary seal at the bottom of the page. "When I liquidated my grandmother's estate 5 years ago to fund your little startup dream," I began, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone because the entire ballroom was dead silent, hanging on my every word. "You assumed it was a blind, loving gift from a naive wife, but I am a data analyst. Julian, I assess risk for a living. I never handed you a gift. I had my attorney quietly structure that initial capital injection as a secured convertible note." Julian froze, his eyes darting frantically from my face to the paper in my hand. He knew enough about corporate finance to know exactly what those 2 words meant. but his brain refused to process the devastating reality. A convertible note is a short-term debt that converts into equity, I explained, speaking slowly and clearly so the silent crowd of investors could hear every single syllable. And the specific terms of my note dictated that, in the event of severe financial mismanagement, or a documented breach of fiduciary duty, such as embezzling company funds to a shell corporation, the debt instantly converts to a controlling equity stake. I took a step closer, forcing him to look down into my eyes. Because of your unauthorized wire transfer to Serena, you violated the core trust clause. I triggered the conversion order at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. Welcome to reality, Julian. I now hold exactly 51% of the voting shares of this company. You do not own me. You are not my boss. I am your boss, and you are officially fired. The silence shattered. The investors erupted into a frenzy of shocked murmurs and loud exclamations. The men who had been shaking Julian's hand just an hour ago were now actively turning their backs, signaling to their assistants to pull any pending term sheets. Julian's knees literally gave out. He collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor of the stage, his hands gripping his hair in absolute, unrecoverable humiliation. He was a king without a castle, entirely bankrupted by his own arrogance. I did not stay to watch him cry. I turned on my heel, the heavy emerald fabric of my gown sweeping majestically across the stage. I walked down the steps and straight through the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted for me immediately, offering me a wide, respectful path. I walked out the heavy oak doors of the estate and into the cool, refreshing Texas night. A sleek black car was already waiting for me at the bottom of the driveway. I slid into the leather back seat, took a deep breath, and smiled. I had lost a husband, but I had gained an empire, and for the first time in 5 years, my ledger was perfectly balanced. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please let me know in the comments below. As a quick reminder, because our channel has been demonetized, we will unfortunately not be uploading any new videos here on YouTube in the near future. We are moving our operations over to Patreon. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us continue producing content, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to our absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again, and stay strong.